podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome back to Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan, and in this episode, really excited to share with you my guest, who is not only one of the most successful riders of his generation, but also one of the voices of TV coverage, both for British Speedway and in the Speedway Grand Prix and Speedway of Nations series, alongside Nigel Pearson. Really, he doesn't need an introduction, but he's going to get one anyway. As a rider, two-time British champion, four-time Commonwealth champion, Intercontinental champion, twice overseas Speedway champion, on long track, three-time world champion, and the Dark Lord of a Dirtometer. He is Kelvin Tatum.
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
Wow, that was great.
As I say, you don't need an introduction, but it's sort of polite to offer you one.
Thank you. That was very kind of you. Yeah, very generous.
Thanks for joining us, though, and you've got your new book out, of course, as well, called Tales from the Top Draw, which is your autobiography you've been writing alongside your commentary colleague, Nigel Pearson, which we're going to talk more about, and a lot of the stories, I guess, you're going to tell us about during the course of this podcast are probably things that feature within the book. Going back to the very start of your career, though, you're one of the few people I think I've spoken to where Speedway wasn't already a constant in your life. Although motorbikes were, a career on shale wasn't necessarily top of the priorities.
Not initially, no, you're right. We were involved in schoolboy scrambling, my brother and I. My dad was taking us on a regular basis. We were racing pretty much, I would say we were racing sort of 3 times every month through the spring, summer and autumn. We occasionally, very occasionally, we'd pop up to Wimbledon to watch a meeting during the year, but it wasn't something we did religiously. So, yeah, you're right. Right up until into my teens, we were schoolboy scrambling or schoolboy motocross. I actually went into the adult ranks as a schoolboy, as a motocross rider. So it was quite a sudden decision and a change of direction in my late teens, really.
And prior to that, you were obviously very young at this age and probably don't have any recollection of it, but your dad was quite a prolific rider on the grass track scene.
You're right. He was a very good grass track rider, and he was somebody actually that, it's difficult to get to the bottom of this because that generation, they're quite reluctant to talk about what they got up to sometimes. They're quite reserved about it. But my dad and my mother actually went off on this 5-year adventure, sort of dashing around all over Europe, having a wonderful time. And sort of one of the first English riders to end up in the East Zone, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, racing on grass ring, long track racing. Speedway wasn't part of it. He never really got pulled towards that. But yeah, the old man was a good rider, very good rider.
And you were a very good rider on the grass track, of course, as well in your early days. And then Speedway came along. Was Speedway a way to make a bit more money than perhaps you would get at grass track, which is more of a sort of an amateur sport, or Speedway a little bit more professional? Or what was the thinking behind all that?
Yeah, although early on I didn't have any real ambitions that Speedway would be my job. I think once I'd made the decision to stop riding on motocross and sort of did some grass track racing, I was just enjoying myself really. And I was, the weekends were something I was looking forward to again. I'd missed a period of time of racing and I was sort of in a bit of a mental turmoil about leaving something behind that we'd done for so long as kids. And then suddenly sort of going into a different area. And Speedway was something that I stumbled across really and stumbled into. But there was never any great plan. There really wasn't. It was just something that I wanted to do because I enjoyed riding bikes.
And so you got yourself a Speedway bike, and was it Hackney that you started at?
Yeah, Hackney were running regular practice days at the weekends, so it was the local track to me. So I was travelling up there, weather permitting, of course. I was getting as much time in on the track. Nobody really guiding you at all. You were just doing it as you tried. It was you're left to your own devices. Basically, you were just given track time.
Yeah.
I was having great fun doing that.
Speedway obviously requires a bit of luck to make it big and to make it into a profitable and successful career as such. What was your backup plan in case Speedway didn't get off the ground, or bike racing in general? I mean, in an alternative universe, what would Kelvin Tatum possibly be doing?
I think I would have ridden motorcycling, but it would have been just purely as a hobby at weekends. I would have continued to work in the family business, I think. Although I was finding that extremely boring at that stage of my life, I didn't find that very exciting. Of course, racing bikes and picking up a bit of prize money at a grass track meeting was much more exciting than working in the parts department at the Toyota garage. Right. So, the disparity between the two. And I started working out that actually I'd won a meeting on the weekend and earned a week's wages. So that was something that was a little bit more exciting than going to work. But probably that would have been the course and the path I would have taken if professional racing hadn't taken off.
Yeah, I mean, and no disrespect to anybody listening to this who works in the Toyota parts department. Of course, a very important job. But
it was. It was. It just wasn't quite as exciting as racing bikes,
which everybody can appreciate.
I'm sure some people may argue with that, but I think I don't think there'll be a lot of people queuing up for that one.
So back at this time then, there was a decent London scene, wasn't there? You know, you had Wimbledon in action down there, and there was a couple of other clubs, and obviously we're missing a big London club at this time. But you're riding for Wimbledon, though, and wasn't it a story that Wimbledon were the opposition and in one meeting, and they sort of they spotted you and they took you on?
Sure, yeah, it was again like all of this. It's sort of you happened to be in the right place at the right time. It was a practice day at Hackney, and you were given a certain amount of time, and then there was just literally quite an unofficial junior match that was going to take place after the free practice had finished. And one of the lads had fallen off and hurt himself, and I was asked to take his place, and I ended up winning 2 or 3 races, and Hackney didn't then contact me, and it was the junior team manager from Wimbledon, whose name escapes me. I should remember that, really. It was quite an important moment, really. But he then asked me to ride for them the following week against Hackney at Wimbledon. So I did, because I didn't hear anything from Hackney.
And how did it go?
I actually did okay. I think I won several races. We did 2 or 3 meetings. We ended up going up to Hyde Road, which was when I look back on that now, it was an extraordinary experience. Yeah. We travelled up there. We stayed overnight. It was freezing cold. Conditions were dreadful, but I actually, as like an embryonic stage riding for Wimbledon juniors, I actually raced at Hyde Road, which was extraordinary, really, when I look back on it. But I did okay. Well, I must have done okay, because the next minute I was being asked to go to the press and practice day for the senior team.
Good sign.
yeah. I guess I was doing something right. Yeah, there was a bit of good fortune in that as well, because Cyril Maidment, the manager, was somebody that my dad knew, and he knew my dad, and the contact was via Cyril to my dad at the garage, and I was invited up. Again, still not really fully appreciating what I was going to be stumbling into or what I was going to be walking into. Not at all, but that was the course of events.
It must have been quite a change for you, though, for only sort of recently discovering Speedway to, before you know it, racing at Hyde Road. We know, a legendary stadium, legendary track. Yeah,
well, I was completely naive to it all, and it was only now when you, like you've just said, Hyde Road. I mean, wow, what a venue. And I ended up being there sort of the second or third time I rode for Wimbledon Juniors. I remember putting my steel shoe down on the inside gate, and it was swallowed up to nearly up to my knee in dirt. I mean, it was that muddy and that wet, but I didn't care. We were there. It was like, I was a bit overwhelmed by the sheer size of the place, But no, it was, and it was all happened remarkably quickly. When I think about from the moment I bought a bike, going to Hackney, and then arriving at the press and practice day the following year in the spring, to basically do a trial for the senior team.
And when I had a chat with Gary Havelock a month or so ago, I mean, he came through grass track as well, and he said that for him, once he'd had a go on a speedway track and how smooth it was compared to riding on the grass, that was it for him. It was like, I'm not going back now. This is what I want to do. Did you find that?
Yes, the speedway was a bit more. It was a surface that was just pleasurable to ride on. Obviously, you're bouncing around and it's a bit raw on the grass track. And I did take some time to get back to riding on the grass. But yes, I agree with Gary. I think that once you've start doing a few laps on the speedway and you start enjoying riding the speedway bike, there is something about it that you get hooked into. Yeah.
So you rode there for Wimbledon for a couple of seasons then, and Coventry really was the side that I think you probably were most synonymous with in the 1980s, wasn't it? That you spent quite a decent amount of time there. I mean, again, another iconic venue, and sadly no longer with us. But it was where all the action was at really for a good period of time in British Speedway, wasn't it, Coventry?
Yes, it was, and I was desperately disappointed to leave Wimbledon. I was away in Australia and I was given the information that they were dropping down the league. So I didn't want to do that. Although I'd never ridden in that league, I wanted to stay in the top division. So I was lucky enough to have several offers, but I chose to go to the Bs. And looking back on it, that was the right decision. But it was very different from the experience of riding at Wimbledon. Very different. It was a younger team with there was a little bit more professionalism around, and a sense of there was a real sense of wanting to do well, and there was immediately more pressure there. No question about it. I felt that as soon as I walked in the place.
What sort of pressure? Pressure to win.
To win.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
For success. And did that come from the team or the fans?
The fans were very expectant. They wanted victory. And I think what it was is, when I look back on it now, and again, this is because I didn't really understand the fact that Cradley had been so successful at the beginning of the 80s, that sort of all-conquering team they had in the early 80s, of course. And with the rivalry, again, which I was unaware of, but the rivalry between the Midlands clubs, particularly Coventry and Cradley when I was there, I think that the Coventry fans were desperate for the Bees to perform well and do well.
And you did very well. Your first season, you were a heat leader in a very strong Coventry team, and also performing on the national stage as well, representing Great Britain, and of course, not least a world final too.
Yeah, well, I rode in 3 world finals in '85. I rode in the pairs, the team, and the individual final at Odsal. And so that, again, that happened quite quickly. I sort of came away from Wimbledon. And the second season at Wimbledon, I'd missed a large part of the season with a broken leg. So effectively, I'd done not very much racing. And suddenly I was riding in 3 world finals, riding with Kenny Carter in the pairs final, and then ended up being I think the only British rider to be in the world final at Odsal. So it was quite, and joining Coventry at the same time. It was a wow. When I was just talking about it now, it was quite an incredible season.
Yeah, the 85 World Final, I think you were the only British out, because I remember, well, I don't remember, I was there, but I can't quite remember it. But having looked back on footage since, there were people holding up massive banners for Kelvin Tatum and stuff. I mean, rock star kind of treatment, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a bit overwhelming, to be honest, Ian. And in truth, it all happened rather quickly. I wasn't quite prepared for that. And I think I could have done with somebody like a Michael Lee, a Kenny Carter, 1 or 2 more established riders to have been in that world final.
Just to take the heat off the attention.
Yes. Yeah, I wasn't ready for that, because I was the only British rider in a British-held staged world final. I mean, and I'd only been riding for 2.5 years. So it was difficult to come to terms with all that attention, to be perfectly honest.
Kelvin Tatum, it's his first World Final. The heavy responsibility is on his shoulders. As the only Englishman here at Bradford, his fast skating could be the key to his success.
Tatum in his first World Final on the inside, the crowd on their feet and up to the first corner, and it looks like the Russian is gone, and so too is Tatum's made a terrific start. Tatum in front, second place is Muller, third place is the Russian, at the back it's Castagna. Well, what a start for Kelvin Tatum, almost overcooks the pits corner, but he's in front. 21-year-old former public school boy. He's been getting in trim with his mum Janet. She's a gymnastic instructor and has been doing aerobics on the lawn. Certainly has him at full stretch here. Is going into the last lap. 338 metres around Odsal, and it is Tatum in front for England. Then in second place Muller. In third place it's the Russian and the Italian way at the back. Quite a start for Kelvin Tatum. He's going to win his first ever World Final race, and the crowd are on their feet. 3 points to Kelvin, 2 for Egon Muller, 1 point for the Russian.
And a crowd as well of, I'm not sure how many were there, but it must have been at least 40 or 50,000.
Yeah, it was a terrific turnout. And yes, it was a nerve-wracking occasion. And one that I think that if I just had one or two other Brits with me that could have just taken a bit of attention off of me, I could have enjoyed a little bit more.
As you mentioned, though, not your only world final in 1985. There was the world pairs as well. And you look at the lineup for that, it was incredible. It was a who's who of Speedway at the time, really. Denmark with Eric Gundersen and Tommy Knudsen. England with yourself and Kenny Carter, as we just mentioned. United States, Bobby Schwartz, Sean Moran. New Zealand, Ivan Major and Mitch Shearer. I think that was Ivan Major's last appearance in a New Zealand jacket, at the very least. Sweden, Jan Andersson, Per Jonsson. Australia, Steve Regling and Phil Crump. And Poland, Gregor Jezowski and Andrzej Huszka.
Andrzej Huszka, yeah. Andrzej Huszka was quite a character, actually. He rode until he was 50, and wow. he was a proper bloke too. He was a bull of a bloke. He was like a Roman Matutek sort of character, and a smashing bloke. But he was around for a long time. But Poland were in a very different place in those days, of course.
Yeah.
The disparity between the 80s and the 2020 is stark, to say the least. It was my first World Final. It was an incredible journey. We ended up with a silver medal, which, to be perfectly honest, I was chuffed to bits with.
And you did that alongside Kenny Carter, as we've mentioned. I mean, just focusing on him for just a second, his legend goes before him, and we all know about Kenny Carter, but quite a Marmite character in Speedway, if that's the right phrase. I mean, how did you get on with him? How did you find him? He's quite known for being a fairly fiery character on his day, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. But I didn't threaten him in a lot of ways. I think he was, with a lot of his contemporaries, he'd sort of rubbed them up the wrong way. But that was primarily because he was so determined to do well. And I think that a lot of people misunderstood that as arrogance. It came across as that. So there's no question about that. He was somebody that was very different away from the track, which I was very fortunate to see. A lot of people don't know that. He was actually a really decent bloke, actually, away from the track. He did grow horns when you got there. And as long as you didn't sort of take him on when he was in that mood, he was fine, in actual fact. And I definitely benefited from his will to win. I embraced that rather than actually just sort of getting a little bit, he might say something, or he might be a little bit brash about a certain subject or something, but generally he and I got on pretty well. And as I say, in that World Final, he was great with me. He was accommodating. There was no arguments over gate positions, for example. He didn't sort of stamp his authority saying, I'm having this gate all the time. We worked quite well, and I think that I had a good experience with Kenny Carter, where I know some people didn't, but I had a good one with Kenny Carter. Short, but it was decent, and it was a shame that he he didn't win the World Championship. He was good enough to. But he was almost trying to win it too much, if I criticise him. I think it was almost a sense of desperation to win it, and it didn't quite work out. An interesting character, definitely. That.
Yeah. And he was very good at, I was in the Kenny Carter fan club as a youngster, and he was very good with sort of marketing and stuff like that probably many riders didn't really grasp hold of quite as much as he did. He'd spend his weekends stood in supermarkets advertising for his sponsors and things like that, wouldn't he? I mean, kind of a different approach to what probably many riders were doing at that time in terms of the business side of it.
Yeah, he was probably ahead of his time there in that regard. It was just at a time when Speedway was losing its profile, which was unfortunate. It was coming off of television. It went through a bit of a lean time on that side. I think if he had won the championship at that time, he may well have been able to keep it rolling. Michael Lee winning in 80, and then we had to wait a long time for another world champion. So. It was a shame that he wasn't able to capitalise on that, because he had quite a strong business acumen around it, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and obviously a huge shock with what was to follow, probably what less than a year after you'd been with him in the team. I mean, that must have been a huge shock for the whole of Speedway, but especially for like yourself, having spent so much time with him. Yeah,
it was a shock. Really was. You're still young. I'm a young man. I've never experienced or come across anything like that in my life. So whether you're racing or whether it's just in any walk of life, it was shocking, to say the least, and a great shame. You're
listening to Humans of Speedway. I'm Ian Brannan, and my guest in this episode, of course, is Kelvin Tatum. And he's got a new book out where there's more of these stories called Tales from the Top Draw. You can get yours from Curtis Sport. But more about that to come, the story behind the book. And, of course, some more stories from Kelvin's career, including not least becoming World Longtrack champion 3 times. And plus, he's going to design his own dream meeting before the end as well. Now, we were with your period at Coventry, mid-80s at Coventry Bees. I mean, it was quite a transitional time for the sport for you as a rider, getting to race against some of the real legends of, say, the 70s and early 80s, people like Phil Crump, Ivan Major and John Cook. But at the same time, there was the new breed coming through, such as yourself, Simon Wigg, Hans Nielsen, Jeremy Doncaster. I mean, how was it being able to race against some of those legends of the sport?
Yes, it was lucky, and then obviously the Brits with PC and Morton.
Yes.
Those guys beginning to be, just coming towards the end of their time. I would have liked to have ridden a little bit more with Peter Collins, I think, in his heyday, because Peter, I didn't see the best of him. He was not quite the rider he had been in the 70s, but there's no question that he was a very special talent. Should have been world champion more than once, I think. The way he rode on the long track, he was never world champion on the long track, but he was more than good enough to be world champion. Fantastic rider. So yes, you're right. It was a transitional period, and again, we bumped into a group of riders from Denmark then that were unstoppable. We were inexperienced, and we were thrown in at the deep end against these guys. And when I look back on that was really difficult, because we were coming up against riders like, everybody knows who they are: Nielsen, Gundersen, Knudsen. They had Janno Pedersen. I mean, it was endless, the riders they were producing, and they were all world champions, and we weren't, and we were, the people like Michael Lee, Kenny Carter, Peter Collins, Chris Morton had been phased out, and suddenly we were very much inexperienced riders up against a world-class team, and that was actually tough, and at times quite mentally difficult to cope with being, beaten fair and square, particularly in the test matches, which were very popular back in those days.
What a good race this is, with young Tatum holding the world champion. And the world champion pulling all the stops out, trying to make an impression on Kelvin Tatum. But my God, this young man has got a future in British Speedway. Kelvin Tatum, the winner in blue, second in white, Eric Gunderson, and third in red, Chris Morton. And everybody in the stadium applauding the efforts there of Kelvin Tatum, who deservedly won that fine race.
There were big events, weren't there, the test matches and running through the course of the season. Is that something that we miss in Speedway now?
I may argue with whether we miss test matches. My memories of test matches aren't always particularly pleasant.
Well, yeah, there is that.
Certainly not in those days, just getting walloped every week. I'd rather not go back to that, thanks.
We miss them as long as we're winning.
No, they were great days, well attended. I think the fear of trying to bring that back, I think that was of its time. I think the sport's moved on. The Grand Prix changed the landscape, and whether there is a place for test matches now or not, I'm not sure. Maybe.
So after a hugely successful time with Coventry, you moved to Berwick, which probably was a bit of a surprise for many people, but Berwick were assembling this world-beating team, and you were the captain of this team in 1991. I mean, how did this move come around from leaving a team that you were so synonymous with to then ending up in Berwick?
I was a hot-headed man, and I'd fallen out with Charles Ochiltree, and I wanted to leave, and I did, and I ended up at Berwick because I'd been conned into going there by Terry Linden, as everybody else had.
Kelvin can offer you a contract where it says, signed by the above-named rider, and put your name on the blue copy. Now, this is the first one. Ladies and gentlemen, he's signing the blue copy. And now, ladies and gentlemen, he's going to sign the green copy. But it's not yet official because he's not yet signed the black and yellow copy. The deed is done.
The overriding factors there are the fact that Terry Linden built a team which was capable of winning the league. He gave, I suspect for people up in that part of the world, that the supporters probably couldn't quite believe what was happening, that they had these international riders suddenly riding for them, and they're going rather well as well. And then for it to all fall apart, I think that was really rather cruel. I think not only was there a situation where you weren't getting paid for the job you were that you were doing. I reflect on the good people up there that were very generous and very welcoming, and that roller coaster that they were put on as well. All these dreams and aspirations suddenly dashed because they'd been duped. That was very, very sad. But I was riding well and things were going good. But as I say, it all just ran out of steam because quite clearly it was all built on sand, that team.
I mean, the club at the time was faced with either closing down or moving into new hands, and Terry Linden was that man, and he was an entrepreneur. When he came in, he announced he was going to be running it like a business, and he saw it as a business takeover rather than him. Whilst he was a Speedway fan, he wasn't going to be running it from a fan point of view. He was very much a businessman. And then got all these riders in like yourself, so obviously it started off very well, but things then went sour before the end of the season, even though you had a relatively successful year on the track, winning the Gold Cup.
Well, things worked well to begin with, Ian. Everything was working tiggly-boo. We were going great. No concerns from anybody about financial irregularities. But unfortunately, once we got to the midway part of the season, then things started to get a little bit tricky. And then, because I took action, I fell out with one or two teammates, and it all got quite uncomfortable. And I can remember the last time I saw Terry Linden was the back of his Range Rover when he was meant to have paid me, and we were on parade, and he dashed out of the stadium with a briefcase full of the gate takings, never to be seen again by Speedway people. Actually,
really,
that's exactly. I was forced to go because I stopped riding, and I was forced to go because I was given assurances that I would be paid up to date when I got there. But as we were on parade, his Range Rover left the stadium, and that was the last time we saw him. But wow. I don't know, like that's a nice little chapter in the book. I mean, that's something that people will be interested to read. I know they will. But as I say, I've got a great relationship when we've been on tour. Nigel and I have been on tour with the Black and Gold Club at Berwick. We've always been very well received there, and they're good people up there, really good people.
You're listening to Humans of Speedway. Kelvin Tatum is my guest, and he's got a new book out called Tales from the Top Drawer, and that one there about Berwick, as Kelvin mentioned, told in a lot more detail if you get hold of the book, and I'm sure all these stories that we're talking about feature somewhere in the book. And Kelvin is going to be creating his dream Speedway meeting, though, which is something that is exclusive to Humans of Speedway, so find out what his dream fantasy meeting would look like. We'll do that in just a bit. Right now, I'm going to turn our attention to a period in your career which I remember you most for, and that was when you rode for Bradford Dukes. You spent 2 years at Odsal, and again, a big track, very similar to what we know Berwick for being, but a big track, big sweeping bowl, and a lot of people found it quite intimidating. Coming to Odsal is what I'm hearing from a number of people. Phil Morris said that, Gary Havelock said that. I mean, did you find that both as a visitor and as a home rider there at Bradford?
Yeah, I think a lot of people found it quite a daunting venue to go to. I loved it right from the word go. I was one of the most hated riders that ever went into the place as an opposing rider. I was gobsmacked when Alan Ham rang me. I couldn't quite believe it but I loved it. I loved riding there, and I found it the absolute opposite. I used to find that I was inspired when I got there, but I understand what Gary means by a lot of riders would have driven in there. Just the stage of it, looking down on it when you came in to the car park and wheeling your bikes in, looking into that natural bowl. It was a very imposing stadium. And quite clearly, lots of riders found that difficult to come to terms with. But I loved it there, and I must say that the fans and the club, I didn't do quite as well as I would have liked, if the truth be known. But still, nonetheless, I found it. It was a good experience, really good experience. Riding for the Ham boys and the team. I wish we could have won the league. We didn't quite manage to do that, but it was a good experience, very good experience.
And as you mentioned, Bradford was not a place for the faint-hearted. At the time, it was the fastest track in Britain, reaching the highest speeds. Not quite up to long track standard, of course, and I think that was prior to your long track days, but certainly a place you could wind it on.
It was a wind it on place. I like that. Winding it on. Very technical term there, Ian.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, I was winding it on. Everybody was pretty much in our team. Everybody used to be, like Gary was brilliant around there. Wiggy, of course, he had a very strong long track background by then. I wasn't really out on the continent by then, but clearly I relished that type of track. There's no question about that. So, the feeling of riding up that banking with your wheels in line, with the bike working well, was a real thrill, and you could really get cracking on around there, and the speed never concerned me. I think that's what sort of excited me. It was tough on the equipment, though. I must say, you had to keep your kit right up to speed. It's not all positive. You had to plough plenty of money into your bikes to make sure that they were fast every week, because if they weren't, you were going to get beat. But no, it was a real thrill riding around Odsal. Great shame when it closed, and I've heard periodically of possible people coming back in to maybe reopen it. If that could happen, that would be great. But I have been there in recent years. It would be tough to reopen it as it was with the developments that have happened there.
Yeah, there is talk about it, and it looks like stock cars are certainly going to be hopefully going back. And it's just that choice of on the question of if there can be a speedway promoter to join them in help funding putting a shale track down. I think they have costed out all the improvements that would need to be required. But yeah, the jury's out as to what the track will look like.
I know when I was there, we were on tour. An evening, it was during the day just before we did an evening at Halifax at the golf club, and we visited there. We did a bit of a thing for Twitter with an old race jacket. And I thought, well, the only way they're going to reinstate that is they've got to basically come back, and that would obviously compromise the rugby pitch. But whether rugby would be continuing in there, I don't know, because the Bulls have had hard times, I believe.
Yeah.
I don't follow it, but I do know that they've had hard times. But, if it could reopen, that would be a big bonus.
It absolutely would. It'd be huge news and an amazing addition to British Speedway for sure to have that track back in play again. I think the current economic climate is not helping things in terms of getting a promoter interested, although I think there is rumour that Steve Rees might be able to stomach running something at national level, even promoted by himself, was the latest news report I saw. So Speedway, firmly a possibility. I think you just need to find a way of making it happen, but stock cars look like they're as close as they've ever been. So keep our fingers crossed over the next few months, and you never know what might happen. Let's hope.
Wow. Well, that would be interesting to see. Fingers crossed.
And that's the voice of Kelvin Tatum, former British champion and also 3-time World Longtrack champion. Now, this is a period of your career that maybe many of us in the UK didn't really follow overly closely because it was happening out on the continent, and it was obviously the days before the internet and stuff like that. But you decided to change code quite a bit and spend a lot more time out on the continent. And as mentioned, it led to you winning 3 world titles.
It did. And it was a conscious decision. We moved south with the family, and I rode for Lakeside, or Arena Essex as it was then. But in the back of my mind, it was irritating me that I needed to do something about it. I wanted to test myself. In '94, I qualified for the World Longtrack final without really putting everything into it, but I'd managed to get in there, and I probably would have been in the final if I hadn't have had one engine failure. But I was then, at the end of that year, I thought, right, this is the moment. I've got to now really give it a go. And the following year, I sort of dropped riding in England and I think I had 2 contracts at the beginning of the year. I was continuing to ride in Swedish League on Tuesdays, but I just thought, sod it, I'm going to give it a go. And I think I came 3rd in my first meeting down at Plattling in April in Bavaria. And from that moment on, to be honest, I was riding nearly every week. It was incredible. It was 1995. It's quite a special year for me.
Because there's a lot of success, wasn't there? Because we're talking about the long track final, but you also the winner of the European Grass Track Championship as well.
Yeah, I won the European Grass Track Championship, and then 3 weeks later I won the World Long Track final as well. Nobody had done that before. I didn't win the Masters Grass Track. I can't remember why. I won the second round. I mean, I blew everybody away, but I can't remember. I might not have even ridden in the first one. I can't remember. But it was like a year-long adventure. Everywhere was new. We were on the rostrum. We were in it. The world final itself, actually, in Cheadle was an incredible roller coaster of a day. I mean, it was unbelievable. I was just shattered afterwards. But no, it was a great year, and it was a big risk to take away the bread and butter of your living. To go on an adventure on the continent. But I was 31, and I thought if I don't do it now, it might be too late.
And long track, in certainly where I live, I'm in the northeast of England, and long track is a distant sport really for many people in this country, but it's massive on the continent.
Well, it was then. Is
it not quite so much now?
No,
yeah.
No, it's unfortunate, but it was big time. I mean, going to what people didn't understand, and Nigel obviously came across this because it was something. It's a huge chapter in the book because it's a decade that a lot of people in the UK are completely unaware of it. But you are riding on wonderful venues in front of huge crowds every weekend, and it's a different discipline. And don't get me on my high horse about what the FIM are trying to do to it, but no, it was a fantastic experience, and I was good at it, and it was, as I say, 1995 was an adventure, going to all of these different venues all over the continent. It was fantastic.
And some of these venues and some of these meetings, they're absolutely massive and draw huge crowds, don't they? I know that we spoke to Chris Durno, who's the referee, and whilst he's never been on the GP circuit in regular Speedway, in the Speedway Grand Prix, he has done the World Longtrack series and said that easily it's on a par with the Speedway Grand Prix that we know it, across France and Germany and wherever else they race. They're massive events, really well attended, some great tracks.
Yeah, we like places like Marmande in the south of France. In France, there are several tracks that are very well attended. As I say, some of the bank holidays in Germany are also traditionally well attended as well. The trotting tracks that you ride on, which are 1,000 metres, are just a joy to ride on. I mean, crikey, it's like ballet when you ride on those places. It really is wonderful. Riding under lights in France is a different matter altogether, and there's a big disparity between riding on the grass track and riding on long track. A very big difference, but it was good, and I got better at riding on the grass track. I knew I had to get better at riding on grass track because I wasn't great on grass track for a while, but I improved. I can remember Tony Knoll, who was the ACU representative around that time, saying, "Well, we're very surprised, Kelvin, that your performances on the grass track have improved." And I think I may have just said to him, I must be a bit lucky at the moment or something, but it was a bit more to it than that. And I actually worked together with a frame builder, and I got better and stronger as a person as well. And it was a real big effort, actually, that period of time.
And you talked there about technical changes and building frames to help you out, and technical development is something that certainly interests you, isn't it? Because I know you've been also working on those new engines, the GTR, the GTRs that have been around.
It interests me. I like it. I'm not a great engine tuner, far from it, but I appreciate what goes on with them, and there's no question that GM have a kind of a monopoly on the sport at the moment. I'm not sure that's always a good thing, but the GTR had the potential to move the sport on, maybe, but it hasn't quite happened, which is a shame. But it does interest me, that side of it, and I think that any of the world champions, if they keep coming back and doing it time after time, you've got to be pretty switched on. You've got to be. You've got to understand your kit. You've got to understand what you need to maximise your ability out of it. So I'm not alone in that, but it's. I quite enjoy it as well. It's something, I don't find it a chore. I think it's something, working with really skilled people, that I like that. It gives me a sense of satisfaction.
And was it a GTR that you took around Cardiff? You had to go on the track there, didn't you?
Yeah, I did several of that. I did quite a lot of those track reports riding a GTR. I rode in Cardiff, I rode at Torren, I rode in Warsaw, which is a different story altogether. Gorzów. I mean, it was fantastic. I loved doing it. It was brilliant. It was nerve-wracking because you had a load of the best riders in the world watching it, because you did it literally half an hour before practice started. So you had a lot of them sort of clawing over. I remember several riders asked me, "What gearing you got?" I don't know. I just said the right one, but that was a real buzz. Actually, it was really. I was a bit disappointed when we weren't allowed to do that anymore. But I rode it like the Friends Arena. I rode in all these places. It was really cool, really cool.
Okay, here we go then. Just emerging onto the track here in the Marianne Rose Arena, and what an arena it is. And I've got the opportunity now to start from the inside, from the tapes, do a couple of laps and try and get a feel. So wait for the green light to come on. It's on. Looking down at the tapes. Away we go to the first corner. We're going to ride the inside initially. There's a very late 8-case there that's quite difficult to work out. Accelerating down the back straight into the bottom corner. We're going to allow the bike to now drift out, coming in a bit deeper.
And it must have been interesting for you as a rider to get a feel for these tracks, particularly the temporary tracks versus the permanent ones that are on the series. I mean, did the bike handle any differently? Did it feel different from your point of view going round those tracks in terms of how everything handled and how the bike worked and felt?
by the time I was riding them, early days, I know where you're coming from. Early days, they used to chop up and get really rutty and tricky. But by the time I started doing my track reports for the television, I think that, there's no question that Ollie Olsen and his team had improved the material and the way it went down dramatically. And when I was doing it before the practice, the track was really quite smooth and slick and a joy to ride on. It gave a decent amount of grip. Tracks were actually quite long corners, almost rode like a circle. The tracks in Cardiff and the Friends Arena. Warsaw is a bit bigger, but... the one time when I had a bit of trouble was in the Friends Arena when I actually did it after practice and the track had cut up a little bit and it was a bit tricky. But to be honest, a permanent track compared to a temporary track, if it's a bit choppy, the way the bike behaves, to be perfectly honest, Ian, is very similar. Very similar.
This is Humans of Speedway. Thanks for joining us. We are in conversation with Kelvin Tatum for some Tales from the Top Drawer. Now, that's the name of his new book as well, which you can own yourself. If you go to Curtis Sport, you can buy it online and maybe even get it in time for Christmas at the time of recording. Of course, if you're listening to this in 2021, you can order it for next Christmas. I guess it still works. Right now, Kelvin, some questions for you from some of your adoring public. I put a little post on social media a little while ago asking if anybody wanted to ask Kelvin anything, and here are some questions for you. So if you're ready, we will begin.
Bit nervous now.
Don't worry, I've vetted them and there's none from Nigel Pearson in there. You're all fine.
Okay.
From Gary Schofield, he says, can you ask Kelvin if he had the gift to reopen any of the now defunct tracks, which one would he choose?
Well, in the UK?
Yeah. That's a good
well,
question,
we've spoken
actually.
about it. It would be, if we could reinstate Odsal as it was, I would love to see that track back on back in Speedway. It was fantastic.
This one from Positive Creed magazine, who says, hi Kelvin, as winner of the Ace of Aces, which is a grass track tournament, isn't it? What are your memories of the event, and do you think there'll ever be a grass track meeting to match the standard of Ian Barclay?
The latter part of that, unfortunately, the answer is no. I find it very difficult to think that we'll get back to what Ian Barclay did with the Ace of Aces. The Ace of Aces was a truly extraordinary meeting at the end of the year, when the weather permitted and it was decent. Thousands and thousands of people, a fantastic lineup, and a meeting that you were genuinely proud to win. I was lucky enough to do it. The Ace of Aces was a special event and one of those meetings that was tough but very rewarding if you won it. Brilliant.
And you won it, was it 2 years on the trot, I think?
I think I won it a couple of times,
Yeah.
yes. I won it 95 when I was world champion, and I won it again the next year. It was kind of coming to the end. I didn't do that many before that, and it's mainly because I sort of was a full-time Speedway guy before that. But it was one hell of an event. I mean, they had 10, 12, 15,000 people there. I mean, it was fantastic in October, freezing cold.
Yeah.
But it was like an end-of-season finale, and it was like a world final. It really was.
One from Matt Davis that says, what was the idea behind the Team Tatum racing venture with Nicholas Klingberg, and was it successful?
It was successful initially. John Postlethwaite, who was the managing director of BSI at the time, was encouraging people to introduce teams in the Grand Prix pits. He wanted it more like Formula One, where you'd have 2 riders per team. In the end, it didn't transpire. It just didn't work, unfortunately. But I was lucky enough to have had conversations with John, and I tried it, and I thought I'd give it a go. And as I say, the first year it worked quite well, but actually, Speedway and that trying to set it up in that way just doesn't quite work. It just doesn't quite work. The World Championship is an individual sport, isn't it? It's totally individual. There isn't manufacturer points and things like that there are when you're working and riding for a manufacturer as well as yourself. So unfortunately that was a little bit flawed, but I had the first year of it was a great experience actually, and Nicholas rode really well.
Mark Davey says, can you ask Kelvin, did he enjoy his time at the showground in 1997?
No.
Does that answer your question, Mark?
Mark, to explain that a little bit more, it wasn't your fault, Mark. It was entirely mine. I was asked to come back into British Speedway by Peter Oakes, who they changed the team at Easter, and I wasn't really prepared. And in truth, I think the best thing I could have done was actually to have turned the opportunity down. I desperately wanted to do well, but logistically I just found it very difficult. With everything then, I'd been world champion, I'd committed to the continent, and then I didn't have enough equipment at home. Getting somebody to help me, it was tough. And to be honest, I didn't do the job I was asked to do. So that's why I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't because the showground was a track I didn't like or the supporters were horrible. It was far from it. I wish I'd done a lot better.
One from simply called Mac, who asks your thoughts on the plan that Poland have currently got about the Extraliga contracts, where they can only limit riders to one other club than the Polish club potentially for next season. And do you think that's going to damage our products and our youngsters getting chances and things like that?
I don't know. It's a bit concerning how much power they have, where they can dictate to riders where and when they ride. But that's the nature of the beast now. I think if this had happened a little while ago, I think it would have been more damaging. We don't have that many riders riding in Poland.
Yeah.
Really. If you look at the teams, there aren't that many riding in Poland. I'm sure some of them want to, and it will be a decision that they'll have to make later on. But the Extraliga is where it's at, and you can't deny that. And if you want to go there and ride against the best and earn a lot of money, then that's where you have to go. Britain can't compete with that. All I would say along that is that I would say that that's fine. The Extraliga have made that decision, and that's what they have decided. But I think that Britain needs to be a little bit more independent and make changes and decisions that suit us, not trying to be them. I think that would be more, that would actually benefit us more.
Paul Francis asks about you. It's a very good point, actually, about you getting your hip replaced amidst your still being involved in racing. I mean, not an ideal situation for you to have to encounter, because that came from an injury, a racing injury, didn't it? And it required you to make that, very, very tough choice to undergo that surgery. I mean, that's if it was a choice, of course, but.
In the end, it wasn't. I had it rebuilt to begin with, and it lasted 5 years. And then it got to a point where the joint was just gently collapsing. So I had to have it done. But the replacement has actually been very good. And I don't get too many problems with it. But something I'd rather not have had done.
Yeah, sure.
And it was such an innocuous crash. I mean, I can't tell you. But yeah, it made life awkward. Certainly, I won a world championship when I came back from it, which was 2000, when I came back after the operation, when I couldn't really walk very well. But that's an injury I really hadn't had.
Yeah, especially at that time as well, where you were, top of the world.
I was flying high, and I was world champion. I was 99, and don't know if I would have won it. I would definitely have been in the top 3 that year, but out of the blue, something like that happened. That was quite tough, actually.
And final question from Deanne Clark, who says, Kelvin, I'm sorry about the sachet of tomato sauce. It wasn't meant in the Surface Cafe 88-89. And says, what's the achievement you're most proud of, inside or outside the sport?
It's a good question. I won. It was great to be England captain and to win the World Cup as a speedway rider. I was very proud of that moment. And I think the other one I've got to mention is winning the World Championship in 2000. If you read my book, you will understand why.
There you go. That's for you, Deanne, and a great
Yes.
plug. Let's turn our attention now then to Kelvin in the media.
Kelvin Tatum, there's a lot of people watching our programme today, I'm sure, who aren't experts in Speedway. Would you just talk us through the main points about this fine machine that you've got to ride tonight?
Okay, right, it's quite different from a normal motorcycle. It has a 500cc single-cylinder engine. It doesn't run on petrol, it runs on a fuel called methanol. It doesn't have any brakes, which may sound quite frightening to a lot of people, but that's the way the rules are. It just has a fixed gear, it just has a clutch that disengages on the start, you just drop the clutch and you're away. It's just a fixed gear with chain drive. It doesn't have any speedos, any indicators or anything silly like that. You've got a throttle and a clutch. Quite a poor sort of seat, and basically that's it.
That's a young Kelvin Tatum back in 1985 explaining Speedway to a certain Martin Tyler. Now, as you can hear there, Kelvin has always been happy to do interviews with the media, and obviously moving towards the back end of your career, Kelvin, the media world were interested in you and your thoughts and joining them on the TV. Obviously, that's what you're known to an entire generation of Speedway fans now for being a reporter and a co-commentator alongside Nigel on the TV. I mean, these things, though, always an element of luck, an element, it's very hard to plan them. I mean, how did it all come about and how did it get started, your TV journey?
I actually was riding and working for the Sky TV for several years, actually, Ian, really, because it started in 99.
Yeah.
And then I retired in 06. So, but by the middle of the O's, I'd become sort of quite a regular on the programme. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. I did sort of look to maybe potentially go into management at that time, but Sky were keen for me to stay involved and be an independent pundit, really, and I did that. But yeah, that transition, coming away from riding and being involved in that was great. Actually, gave you a purpose to go to Speedway meetings and gave you a reason to stay involved. I'm grateful for that because I couldn't have foreseen that. I didn't know that was coming. Nobody really did until it happened. So yeah, I didn't really understand what I was meant to be doing, but it transpired that they seemed to enjoy what I was doing, and I seemed to have survived. So it's worked out okay.
Yeah, surviving in media is just the main aim, really. As long as you get asked back in some form or another, it's always a good sign.
Well, you don't get too many compliments, that's for sure.
No, the compliments are usually fairly rare, but it's as long as you're not getting any. No news is good news. Is my way of reading it.
That is true. Nothing. Yeah.
You started off as a more of a summariser, but I think lately you've taken on a bit more of the commentary alongside Nigel. I mean, those are specific skills. Being a commentator and commentating on that action and calling it as you see it is actually a very difficult skill that not everybody can do, and you've learnt how to do that. I mean, it has been a bit of a learning curve for you getting into this sort of side of it, hasn't it?
Yeah, it was something I wanted to do quite early on, actually. I wanted to have a go at commentary because I found, to be perfectly honest, brutally honest, I was bored most of the time being just a pundit, because you get about one question or two questions every 4 heats. And as much as I enjoyed being there and being part of it, I wanted to be, like commentary. I just thought, yeah, but you're involved in every race. And I don't know, just something inside me said to me, I'd like to have a go at that. So, although the first time I did it actually was in a double header at Peterborough, it was awful. It was a disaster, really. But and I wasn't asked to do it again for some time. But I did get an opportunity to do it with Tony Millard actually at Sky when we were doing it off tube for the GPs, and from that moment on, I was generally asked to do it fairly regularly. So it was, and I enjoyed it. It was like racing, when that guy from the truck says "Go commentators," you got those few nerves. It's live, and it was brilliant. I love it, and I still love it to today. Actually, it's great.
People don't probably appreciate how long it takes to get a good partnership together. I mean, you've been working, doing this job for around about 20 years or so now. I mean, that is a long time, but it takes a long time to get a partnership like yourself with Nigel. Things are moving so quickly, but when you're commentating, Nigel needs to throw to you to say something and you need to hand back to him. You kind of need to know what you're all going to contribute to that conversation, and that takes years and years to get right. But you've got that partnership now.
We have, and it's something that we've clicked, and there's no doubt about that. And as the time's gone on, we've become really good at working together. There's generosity between the two. He allows me to commentate, because to be perfectly honest, he's lead commentator. He's a professional broadcaster, but at times we're both commentating, which is unusual, I think. But it seems to work, and we have a lot of fun doing it. We feel privileged to be able to do it, and by and large, I think people enjoy it. There will be people that criticise and we get too excited, but on the other hand, Speedway is an explosive, exciting sport when it's at its best, and I think we portray a lot of that.
You don't want the commentary sounding like you're commentating on the bowls, though, do you? It needs to have the excitement in there, and if you don't get excited, how is anybody else going to get excited about it, really?
That's right, and we also we don't fake it. You can't fake that for 20 years. You just can't do it. You're going to run out. You're going to run out of steam. So it is something, because Nigel is a genuine fan of the sport, although he works in the sport. He loves it, and I still retain, as I say, going to those meetings and going to those events are great. It's super to be there.
I'm going to say, it's continued your adventure in Speedway, hasn't it? Going to these, I mean, maybe this year are the exception, but you get to go to the stadiums and witness it firsthand most of the time.
You do, and as I say, I've been able to watch firsthand how the sport has evolved, and watching new riders come and evolved. Watching Bartosz Schmarzlik, Ty Wolfenden, all those kids out there now going great guns and riding out of their skins. Being fortunate enough to have watched and been witnessed Tony Ricardson, Golub, all those guys, Crump. It's been It's been a real privilege to watch those world-class guys do it. It's been brilliant.
When you look at the sport now, though, with all your experience, I mean, are there things that you've learnt since finishing as a rider that you wish you'd known earlier when you were still active?
I think as a Speedway rider, I could have been better. I think I could have been. I think I should have been a little bit more diligent with my equipment, probably. It's interesting how as soon as I started riding on the long track grass track, I did that automatically, and I wish now when I look back at that I'd spent a bit more energy on that side of it. Talking to Greg Hancock and those guys, they went in depth with their kit. Ricardson did as well. I think that that's something that probably I could have been better at. Well, I know I could have been better at.
Now, whilst your partnership with Nigel on the TV has been severely impacted this year with what 2020 has brought to us, you've still been working closely with Nigel on your new book, Tales from the Top Draw. We've talked about lots of things that are in the book through the course of this podcast, but there's plenty more stories in there as well. You've been working with Nigel to write it, but the person who writes the foreword is another legend of the modern version of Speedway that we've just been talking about. Greg Hancock is the person who introduces your whole book. I mean, what a coup to get him to give you the big endorsement. I mean, that must have been quite humbling for you as well.
Yes, it was. I was shocked. I was stunned. We invited him on as a part of a podcast, actually, and it just Nigel had been asking me about who can we get to do the forward, and he came to mind, and I sent him a message, and he agreed to do it. And he said not only that, he would be honoured to do it. I mean, wow. I was blown away. A rider of his stature, and when you can look back on his longevity, his success, and the class act that he was as a rider, it's fantastic to have him do the forward for the book. I couldn't be more pleased.
And where did the idea for the book come about? I mean, I know that you've had a lot of people online maybe suggesting that you should have done this for a little while now. I mean, why is now the right time, and how was it reliving all of these memories again?
The pandemic really is the reason it's coming now. I've wanted to do it for a while, but one thing and another, it just didn't. There was a couple of false starts, and then it sort of got left behind again because you get busy and you sort of drop it. But the pandemic, with the opportunity with people having more time, that helped in massively. That really got it going, and we probably got halfway through it before Nigel got busy again. And so that's why the book is coming now. The book is a read, though, Ian. This is not just how well I did here and how well I did there. There are scenarios that I've remembered. My wife has told me that I'd forgotten about. And that side of it is what I want from the book. I want it to be a journey and information and stuff about racing that's around the sport, not just what goes on the track itself. So, but generally, it's been quite exhausting because my memory is dreadful. So I've had to really dig deep at times, and it's been great actually. I found myself just a couple of times recently. Because we've gone through lots of photographs that we haven't looked at for 10, 15 years, and I found myself having literally a quiet moment. I had a cup of coffee in my hand. I was looking at 3 pictures from a meeting in Schiesel in North Germany from 1998 when I won a Grand Prix there. And I was just thinking, crikey, wow, that was a cool day. And I just hadn't even thought about it. So there's been some smashing times to remember, really cool times to remember.
I suppose as well, when you're a rider, things happen so quickly. You know, it's meeting, wash your bike, travel to the next meeting, ride the bike, go back home again, get some sleep, wash your bike, on to the next meeting. It's so rapid fire, you probably don't have time to sit and think about all the things that happened. Yeah,
those days were, well, like, I know that Nigel himself just was sort of a bit shocked by and blown away by, he said, well, I had no idea about any of this. And of course, that's what, when people read it, I think I'd like to feel that they will be sort of let into that world in lots of ways.
And interesting that Nigel should say that, because obviously Nigel Pearson has ghostwritten this with you, and he obviously knows you very well, and for him to sort of rediscover these stories, that you've probably shared loads of stories when you've been on the road together over those years doing the GPs, I imagine, as well, that
sure.
You know, it's a journey for him and for us all to enjoy.
Yes, there will be. There's highs and lows in it. You know, it's not just about winning.
Yeah.
There's a lot of losing in there as well, and it's an insight into how you deal with those low moments and injuries and coming back and family life and all of it. You know, trying to sort of keep a lid on all of it going on all at the same time. So. Yeah, it's been I'm quite pleased. You know, it's just about there now. So it'll be out for Christmas. So I'm hopeful that people enjoy it. I really do.
And to get hold of it, then it's all the links are on your social media channels, aren't they? But it's an order online kind of job. It's not going to be appearing in shops just yet, at least, is it? As I understand?
No, it won't be. No, we're going to do it online.
Yeah.
We're hopeful if we go back to some form of normality, people will be able to do book signings. We'll be on tour, and people can come and buy it from us. So we're keeping our fingers crossed for that. But initially, we're going to do it online, and it's actually, the pre-orders are quite strong. So again, there is some interest in it, which is encouraging.
I know. A relief.
A relief to think, crikey, somebody's going to buy it.
I'm sure plenty of people will. If you want to get hold of the book, you need to head online. Curtis-sport.com is the place you can get it. And of course, there's links to on social media, Kelvin's social media on Twitter, and on the Humans of Speedway pages as well. You'll get links on there, but get hold of your copy. It's a fascinating read. But just one thing left to do, Kelvin, now before the end of this podcast, and that is to do something that I'm not sure if you've ever done before. You design your own fantasy speedway meeting. What would it look like? Very much looking forward to this, and it's something that everybody on Humans of Speedway who is so far been interviewed by us has done, and it's always a fascinating discussion. So what we're going to do is design the whole meeting, coming to your dream 1 to 7 and rules you would change, but we're going to start off by focusing on the track. Now, this is purely the racing surface, the shape and the shale of the track that you would choose if you were putting together your dream meeting. I mean, where would we start with that, Kelvin?
This was between two. One was Bidgosh, and the other is Bellevue.
The current one. The
new one. I've gone with the new Bellevue.
Yeah.
The racing there is extraordinary. In a short period of time that track has been open, there has been some unbelievable speedway there. It stacks up against anywhere in the world, actually. So I'm going to be patriotic and go with Bellevue on that score.
Good stuff. Yeah, nice wide track and nice banked bends as well. I think
Chris Morton and David Gordon, but Chris Morton particularly was very closely involved and very involved in the design of that track. And you have to, although they're no longer involved at Bellevue, the fact is that the track is right, definitely right.
And the stadium that you'd put that track in, for the spectators, for the atmosphere, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, again, I'd put it in Torren, because you could go Cardiff as well. You could go Cardiff, but I don't know if that's allowed.
Oh, you can have any. People have said Wembley and all sorts in the past. So,
right. Well, in that case, I'd go Cardiff.
Right.
I wasn't sure whether I was allowed a temporary track.
Oh, no. All the rules have gone out the window after the first episode.
I see. Okay. Yeah. All right. The rule book's been ripped up. Okay. Brilliant. So, I would put the National Speedway Stadium track at Bellevue in the Principality Stadium in Cardiff. Yeah. Because Cardiff is a stadium that is steeply banked. You're close to it, so the atmosphere is fantastic with the roof shut. If you had that track in that stadium, I think you'd have a winning combination. Yeah,
I think that Cardiff is brilliant. The track is just a little bit tight, isn't it?
It is, yeah. You're just restricted for room. Yeah, it's just you can't without extending it. You can't do much about that. But certainly, the atmosphere in there is fabulous.
Yeah.
It's better than all the others. I think the Narodowy Stadium in Warsaw is close because it's 55,000 people, but it somehow lacks the intensity of the Principality because it's actually, although it has a roof, it's still open. It's still open. It isn't actually fully enclosed. And Cardiff, I think, with the enthusiasm of the Brits in there, I think it adds something very special.
Yeah, the indoor nature of it just makes something different, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Yeah, very much so.
And it alters the sound too, doesn't it, of the bikes? The bikes have somehow got more resonance. They make a different noise than...
Yeah, but it echoes around that stadium, doesn't it? And, the noise doesn't dissipate away. It's just enclosed in it, the smell. I don't think it's particularly healthy in there.
I'm sure they've got air conditioning.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody cares because I think it's generally a highlight of the year. So yeah, I like that combination.
Absolutely, I think we all do, and we all hope we can get back to that this next year. Fingers crossed. Okay, your dream 1 to 7 then. Any rider, any era, alive or not, no points limits. Up to you.
I wrote 2 down, actually.
Wow.
And I can't... I did write 2 down because one I wasn't sure was right, and then I did one more from my era. I went... The first team, I've got Major at 1.
Yeah.
I've got Hancock at 2. I've got Obi Fundin at 3. I've got Barry Briggs at 4. I've got Tony Rickardson at 5. And I've got 2 youngsters at reserve in Woofenden and Smarslik.
Not a bad reserve lineup.
No, not too bad at all. But they can take up to 7 rides, of course, in the Britain.
Oh man!
In the UK. So I'm thinking they could be quite busy at times. The other team was Penhall at 1, Gunnarsson at 2, Rickardson 3, Per Jonsson at 4, Hans Nielsen at 5, Ermolenko at 6, and Gary Havelock at 7.
Wow!
So they were my 2 teams. Yeah, it's still a decent team, isn't it?
And
I'd like to see those. I'd like to see those two teams race each other. Actually,
wow, yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, that would be some league match, wouldn't it?
Sort of a more modern day lineup versus the old school classics.
Yeah, with Major, Funding, and Briggs would obviously have to roll the clock back a bit. We'd have to sort of somehow, because it's fantasy, so they're youngsters. So but it could be quite. My initial lineup was that they had to be multiple world champions. And they just, Smiles nicking his second one this year, he just qualified. You know, it was a tough class to get into that first lineup.
It's definitely an elite lineup.
It is indeed. It is indeed. So I hope that satisfies the question.
It does, and more.
Brilliant.
The referee for your meeting then?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. I've thought about it. Frank Ebden was a referee. Frank Ebden was a referee that came to mind. But I think there might be one or two riders going back to the pits, although regulations now probably take away the influence that Ebden had on meetings. I think that rather undermines him. But I think probably just for a smile on my face, I think I'd put Frank up there.
For a bit of malice.
Yes.
Yeah, Frank's had a couple of mentions, and I think that he's had mentions from, I think Shane Parker particularly mentioned Frank in that would be absolutely the last referee that would be anywhere near the box for his meeting.
Yeah.
But then Gary Havelock, he chose Frank as well, and he said the thing with Frank is you knew where you were with Frank.
Oh yeah.
And so it wasn't like, one day you got one version of the rules and another day you knew with Frank that everything was to the letter, and therefore you knew what to expect.
Well, you had to behave, and to be honest, he was ahead of his time. Because now, when you look at the rules that have been implicated, particularly at Grand Prix, with, you can't move on the start. And effectively, that's what Frank was implementing in the 80s.
Yeah.
So, as I say, I had plenty of run-ins with Frank Ebden. I had some fairly forthright conversations with him over the phone. And he was a nuisance because he loved, actually, his downfall, actually, was the fact that he used to like to be the centre of attention, which was a shame. Because actually the way he officiated was right to a lot of the time. And Gary, I agree with Gary. I think that you knew if Frank Ebden was in charge, you knew exactly where you were.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You knew, because other referees, you knew, I can do a bit, I can get away with a roller here. I can, you know what I mean? You could get away with that, but you couldn't with him. So, yeah, when you got changed, you thought, right, okay, it's that type of night. You knew you were going home early.
yeah.
Because he didn't get a lot of time between races. 2 minutes was on.
Yeah. Well, Gary said about that as well. He said, well, that was fine for me because I live miles away, so it just meant I could get out and get home early.
I'm surprised he didn't say that was more time to get in the bar.
Well, yeah.
there was that as well. But either way, whether you're quite happy spending a few quid in the bar or whether you had a long way home, Frank, you generally didn't have a late night when he was there.
And it's not a question I've actually asked, I don't think, before, but when you get excluded or you have a run-in with a referee and you go straight to the phone, I mean, I think I mentioned it to Chris Durno when I did an interview with him, and he was sort of saying, well, it's just a means for me to explain my thinking. But I think sometimes riders ever think that decision's going to get overturned in some way, or is it purely just a way to vent your frustration at the situation?
It's the latter, Ian, because the only other people that you can vent at are the people that will work for you.
Yeah.
Because they're the people that you're going to go back to. So at times it's a way of just being able to unleash all that adrenaline and frustration on somebody before you upset somebody that's working for you in the pits. But no, I can't remember the last time I saw a referee change his mind.
They never do.
They never do. Yeah. So it's just one of those things. What I would say about referees is that they are a group of people that have a difficult job.
Yes.
But at times because there isn't this interaction between ex-riders or advice from riders in certain circumstances, I think that's something that would help them if that could happen.
Yes.
Looking at footage, for example, of a decision where if I was at the seminar, I would say, well, that's wrong because of this. You know what I mean? You could have that open discussion to maybe effectively, because a lot of them haven't ridden.
I know that when we did the episode with Chris Durno, he said that it is something that they're aware of, and the fact that not many riders are willing to take up being a referee. But you're not talking about that. You're talking about involving riders in some way to discuss decisions and sort of help inform referees further on various racing situations.
Well, I think that I don't know. They must have seminars. They must have training courses. I don't quite know how the procedure works. I've never sought to find out. But the fact is that that's always something that I felt that when decisions are made, that I would, as a pundit commentating on a Grand Prix, that I just fundamentally don't understand how they've seen it that way. That why there shouldn't be an opportunity for footage to be shown of a race where a referee's made a decision that hypothetically an ex-rider would disagree with, and then to explain why they disagree with it, because potentially they may not understand. Now, there's always going to be differences of opinion, but that's something for somebody who hasn't ridden, and this is not to say that I don't wish to be arrogant or derogatory in this. It's fact is, if you haven't, actually having information from somebody who has to explain why a circumstance or why a rider took a particular action, to inform them, I don't see any negatives in that.
On the subject of referees, our attention on this little feature now turns to the rule that you would change. If you were in command of the rule book of Speedway, what would Kelvin be tweaking with?
A rule that I would change. Yeah. One of the rules that I remember when I was riding in Sweden, there was a rule that if you kept the same team, you didn't have to change it. And one of the negatives I find is that, certainly for supporters and riders, is that they bounce around clubs every year. You get riders not really staying in one place for very long because of points limits changing, and hence riders having to move clubs. I think that's difficult for lots of reasons, and I'd like to see the fact that if a team kept the same 1 to 7, irrespective of their team average, that they can roll that team out again.
I think there was a plan to do that, wasn't there, in this country, or maybe in the Championship League at least, in some form or other. There was certainly some kind of points grace if you kept your full 1 to 7 together. But yeah, I think riders would prefer that as well, surely, wouldn't they? To know that you're going to be there for a few years.
Yes, because what happens is that you build up relationships with local people, with sponsors, with the area. You get comfortable at the track, you understand it. Fans can really get behind their heroes. To become a hero at a club in 1 year is unlikely, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that the continual movement of riders from track to track every year and every winter, I don't think it's a positive. I think it's a negative. So that's something, as I say, that came to mind.
And it helps you plan as well, doesn't it, to know that you're going to be going to this club for the next year, and in the winter you're not scrabbling around hoping that you
obviously, as long as you can do the deal. You know, if you've done a lot better than if you were a second string rider and you then progress to being your average determines that you've then moved up the pecking order, as long as you get paid accordingly. But then there's pressure on the promoter, of course, then to keep that, because if he's got, like we had it at Coventry, that team at Coventry won back-to-back league titles. It didn't change very much. In Sweden, we won 4 league titles in 5 seasons. That team just grew up together and came good. And we don't get that now. You just don't get it. Effectively, you're just a number.
Yes,
you're just a number on the page. Doesn't matter what your name is. It's just whether you're an 8.62 rider or a 4.4 rider. And I think that detracts from it, rather, to be honest.
You've already kind of answered this question in a way. A team from any time in history, from any league in the world, as the opposition, but you've kind of already touched on that, really. But was there another team that you had in mind?
Yeah, sorry. What I did do though, was look, when we were at the Coventry Bees won back-to-back league titles in '87 and '88.
Yes.
and that was a team which was terrific. I would like to have raced against the Ipswich team that won everything in '98.
Yes, I think it's been mentioned a few times. That seems to be coming forward as possibly the greatest British team of all time, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Ricardson, Golub, Nichols, Louis. I mean, my God. I mean, you'll never see a team like that again. But I would like to have seen how our team that won back-to-back league titles stacked up against them. I think we'd get beat by about 10. I think we might get beat by 10, but it could be quite an interesting night.
Yeah, a bit of a home advantage at Ipswich has always been a thing, hasn't it?
Yes, true enough. But I sense people like Golub, Ricardson, Louis and Nichols could ride pretty well anywhere. But yes, it was a hell of a team. But maybe that just makes up for me not maybe jumping the gun a bit earlier on.
No, it's great. And one final question. I mean, if when you look back at your career and your adventures that you've had, either as a rider or in your TV days that you've had now, what's the one story that you kind of come back to and dine out on, or look back with the fondest memories?
Oh wow, there's been a lot of them. There's been some very funny times on the television side. Mm-hmm. You got to read the book about that. not giving that away. It's almost impossible for me to answer, actually, because I've had some fantastic times. I think that from an engine tuner walking out on the first corner because it's a 5-lap final, and he's told me before the race that he wasn't sure if the engine would last 5 laps, and it's true,
right?
And that it was a 900-meter long track meeting, and Hans Zerk said to me before the race that if I was in front in the final, in front of Simon Wigg, Carl Meyer, Gerd Riss, best riders in the world, that I had to ride slowly on the last lap to make sure that the engine would survive. And I was just thinking, are you going to tell all the rest of them that we're going to go slowly on the last lap so that effectively I will win the race anyway? So I can remember, this is clear as day, that the first corner was where the pit gate was, and I was in the lead, and I had no intentions of riding slowly on the last lap, not when I was going to win the meeting. And Hans actually walked across the track to the middle of the track, and he was sort of waving for me to slow down. And I remember going by, and I mean, this is one of the most dangerous things I've ever seen anybody do at a meeting ever, where he actually walked where people are doing well over 100 miles an hour going through the first corner trying to slow his rider down. It was extraordinary. Fortunately, the engine survived, and I told him so in no uncertain terms when I came in, but it was a very bizarre, crazy moment. But at the end of the day, I went over the line and I was the winner, and so I didn't care. I just didn't care. And so don't always listen to the powers that be in the pits. Take decisions out there. But that is one amongst very, very many. I've been very lucky to have had some extraordinary experiences. So, yeah.
Speedway, but not too fast.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. I was sitting in the pit box, and he was telling me this before we went out for the race. I'm just saying, but Hans, how am I going to say? Is everybody else going to ride slowly on the last lap? And then I don't think so. So it was I was riding around to the start, completely sort of confused. I'm thinking, this is really quite odd. And I thought, this is nonsense. This is absolute madness. So the green light came on, and that was it. I rode flat out.
Sort of has shades in my mind of like a tuner being like the scientist from Back to the Future, who's got a cunning plan, but not sure it will work.
That's right. Yeah, we're not sure about this one, but we were going through a period of time when the engines did hand grenade quite regularly. So I was kind of aware of it all, but I just thought that plan it's going to fail, Hans. That one is not got success written all over it. I'm sorry, mate, but I'm just going to have to defy the orders.
It's a brilliant story, as they've all been. But been a pleasure talking with you, Kelvin. Thanks for joining us.
No, you're very welcome.
My thanks to Kelvin Tatum for joining us on this fascinating episode of Humans of Speedway. And don't forget, you can get hold of Kelvin Tatum's book, which contains more details of all of the stories we've talked about really in this podcast, plus many more besides as well, because he has kept the best for the book. So you can get that if you head online to curtis-sport.com. You'll find all the info you need. You can look out on Kelvin's social media pages as well. He's on Twitter at Kelvin_Tatum. Also check out our feed as well, the Humans of Speedway social media, because we'll have the links there too. You can follow us on Twitter at Speedway Humans, also on Instagram and Facebook if you search for Humans of Speedway as well, where we'll also search some preview clips of upcoming episodes and maybe the odd opportunity for you to ask questions for upcoming guests as well. So make sure you follow us on there to be involved and find out all the details as and when they come up. And don't forget to check out the previous episodes if you're new to Humans of Speedway. Loads more for you to take in. Interviews with Gary Havelock, the man who co-wrote Kelvin's book, Nigel Pearson, is one of the previous guests as well. Phil Morris, the race director of the FIM Speedway Grand Prix and Speedway of Nations series. Shane Parker, we've got referee Chris Durno. There's so many to check out. Have a look at the back catalogue, and we'll hope to speak to you again very soon on Humans of Speedway.
Social Podcast Network.